All right, Zelensky just brought the fire to one of the largest podcasters in America who is pretty pro-Russia. Podcaster Lex Fridman secured an interview with Zelensky in Ukraine, and during this interview, Zelensky has to push back a lot on the idea that both sides are equally at fault, on the idea that they should forgive Vladimir Putin, or that Vladimir Putin somehow is the victim in this scenario. Zelensky does a great job articulating his beliefs, and I want to run you down some of the best moments of this interview. Make sure you drop a like and subscribe to boost this pro-democracy message. And before we jump into this first clip, this video is weirdly dubbed, so Zelensky is speaking in Ukrainian during this interview. Meanwhile, Lex Fridman is speaking in Russian, and the reason why Zelensky doesn't want to speak Russian, I'll let him explain it, but just know there's a weird voiceover that they did in post during the editing. That's not something I did. This is just how the interview was. So without further ado, let's watch Zelensky explaining why he doesn't speak Russian. And he says it's because he doesn't want to speak the language of a leader who has caused so much devastation in Ukraine. I mean, this statement alone speaks volumes about not just language, but about sovereignty, identity, and defiance in the face of Russian aggression. And then I'll show you some clips where Zelensky basically snaps. Watch.
And impactful if we speak in Russian.
I speak Russian perfectly, of course, and I understand everything you are talking about. However, I can't respond in Russian the entire interview. It's because this is how it is today. I am not making anything up. You can see it all for yourself. You can feel and hear it. Today, there were 73 missile attacks against us, and people were killed. There were over 100 drones today, and this is a daily occurrence. The people who attack us, they speak Russian. They attack people who were only recently told that this was actually in defense of Russian-speaking people. And this is why I respect neither the leader or director of today's Russia, nor the people. That's it. And I don't think that you can just pretend that nothing's happening and give Putin a pass once again for saying that we are one people, that we speak one language, etc. They speak the language of weapons. That is a fact. And we are peaceful people who want to protect themselves and defend their freedom and their human choice. At the beginning of the war, I addressed Russians in Russian. Zero effect. They're mute. They do not listen. They did not listen. Some are afraid. Some have other issues. They have different reasons. It's like when a person is drowning, and people walk by because they can't hear them. And someone walks on by crying, afraid to save them. It doesn't change anything for the one drowning. They need someone to help them. This is why I honestly despise these people, as they are deaf. They began the occupation in the supposed defense of the Russian language. And that's why, with all due respect, I would like to give an interview in Ukrainian. This is very important to me. If there are some points that you want me to explain in Russian, I can certainly do that. I can certainly occasionally speak Russian. But in general, no. I'm not sure that...
Okay, so Zelensky is obviously approaching this interview in good faith and is using this platform as an opportunity to spread the truth about what Ukraine has been through. He said there have been 73 missile strikes today, and now Lex Fridman is getting a taste of what it's like to be in Ukraine. And just for a little bit of backstory, if you don't know much about Lex Fridman, he interviewed Trump a few months back, and this dude isn't ultra MAGA or anything, but he is very right-wing adjacent and very pro-Russia. He is openly pro-Russia, and he runs defense for Russia. And there's a problem with people who are on the right, or even just people who are ignorant of the war. They've been convinced successfully by Russian propaganda that both sides are equally at fault in this war, and that is something that we have to rewire, because both sides are not equally at fault. Russia invaded Ukraine unilaterally. They invaded their next door neighbor, and it's an act of aggression. It's an act of territorial expansion. Ukraine is fighting a purely defensive war, and people don't seem to get that. I mean, for conservatives who are supposed to understand self-defense and protecting your property, they sure don't care when Ukraine has its border invaded, literally invaded by Russia, as Russia tries to grab more and more territory. Now, during this clip, Zelensky actually starts to get pretty pissed off. Let me play this.
I understand, but unfortunately, the reality is that a compromise is needed in order to reach an agreement.
In your understanding, the fact that he is in jailed after all the murders, he is not in jailed assuming all the murders, and no one in the world is able to put him in his place, send him to prison. Do you think this is a small compromise?
This is not a small compromise, and to forgive him will not be a small compromise.
To forgive, no one will forgive. This is absolutely impossible to forgive him. We cannot get into the head and soul of a person who lost their family. Nobody never will accept this. Absolutely impossible. I don't know, do you have children?
No, not yet,
Okay.
but I would like to.
Yes. God bless. And this is the most important thing in life. And they simply took away the most precious thing from you, will you ask? Who ruined your life before going to rip their head off? I'm just curious. They took your child away. Are you going to ask who did this? And they will answer that that dude did this. You will say, oh, well, then there are no questions. No, you will go fucking hell and bite their head off. And it will be fair.
Good point from Zelensky there. And Lex Fridman's claim that forgiveness is needed, or once you have forgiveness, you can reach compromise, is so incredibly naive. And Zelensky doesn't hold back there. He starts to go in. Something that a lot of people know about Lex Fridman, a very common theme among all of his interviews, is that he's incredibly naive. I mean, this dude said 2 years ago that he could likely end the war with Putin and Zelensky if he just sat down with both of them. He's very naive, and he thinks that love solves everything. Vladimir Putin is just misguided, and Zelensky is just misguided, but no. I like when Zelensky says, do you have children? You can't step into the minds of people who have lost their children and say that they need to forgive Vladimir Putin when he'll never go to jail. He'll never be in jail for any of the murder. And then Zelensky asks, is that a small compromise? So the frustration there is palpable. And to Zelensky, there can be no compromise with a man who has violated every single international norm and whose actions have led to mass suffering within his country. Mass suffering of children, mass graves. Now, just to unpack Fridman's naive position, again, it's very naive. By suggesting forgiveness, Fridman is using the wrong framing. He's inadvertently running defense for Russia for the reason I was saying earlier. This framing ignores the reality that Ukraine is fighting a purely defensive war for their own country's survival, when Russia is the sole aggressor. Russia is the sole aggressor in this case, violating Ukraine's territorial integrity. They broke the Budapest Memorandum, which said that, number one, if Ukraine gave up their nukes, that Russia would never invade, but then also, if they gave up their nukes, we would protect them via troops. So we broke it as well. We had every incentive to protect them, but Russia is the one that is shaking up the international orders. But just to step back for a second, after violating Ukraine's territorial integrity, after dumping children in mass graves and undermining international agreements like the Budapest Memorandum, committing atrocities against civilians and soldiers alike, to suggest compromise or forgiveness or to say there's some sort of equivalence between the two sides, it's dangerous. It's dangerous, and it's not true. This type of rhetoric is part of a larger problem with Russian propaganda seeping into the mainstream. You have people like Tucker Carlson, people like Vivek Ramaswamy, even Donald Trump. Donald Trump isn't as heavy-handed with it. We all know he's more sympathetic to Russia, but he's not as heavy-handed as somebody like Tucker Carlson, who genuinely flew to Moscow to interview Putin. And Trump doesn't have to be heavy-handed. When he has stooges like Tucker Carlson or like Benny Johnson or Tim Pool, how have I forgotten about Tim Pool, who was taking money straight up from Russia? Now, these people are spreading this narrative, and then the average American citizen who just works all day and is rather uninformed about global events because they're focused on their day-to-day lives think that we're sending all of our taxpayer dollars over there and that Zelensky is some sort of con man who is swindling the American people, when no. They are fighting a purely defensive war, and we're sending stockpiled military equipment. It's like 80% military equipment that we're sending over there so we can protect our ally, so we can defeat Russia. And in the process, it does boost the U.S. manufacturing economy because we get to recreate all of this, or we get to rebuild all of the military equipment that we sent over there. So whether people like Joe Rogan or Lex Fridman are intentionally becoming useful idiots for Russia, We have to keep calling this out. I honestly, to be a little bit charitable, I don't think Joe Rogan is some like pro-Putin dude who has like a Putin shrine and just loves it. I think Joe Rogan is a useful idiot who is sucked up in his own algorithm and now is running defense for Russia. Lex Fridman, I think, actually does know what he's doing. He is pro-Russia, full stop. But amplifying this propaganda only muddies the water for millions of viewers, so I'm glad Zelensky got the chance to go on this platform. I want you to watch this next clip where Zelensky just says, this is bullshit. He's actually pushing back against the West right here because Zelensky's frustration isn't just with Putin or Russia or its apologists. He's also pretty mad at the West, and rightfully so. He recalls asking the United States for one thing. If you're sure there's going to be an invasion from Putin, I only ask to send Ukraine weapons or strengthen us with preventative measures. We can intimidate him in certain ways, but instead the West's response was weak. And as much as I love President Biden, I will argue in favor of his presidency till the end of our days. There's a reality where he could have been stronger off the bat to show that we're serious. He's essentially allowed Putin to have a monopoly on the escalatory rhetoric in this region.
I asked only for one thing, primarily from the United States. If you are sure, if you have the evidence, if you talk to him and he tells you that there'll be an invasion, if all this scares you, I only asked for two things. Send us weapons, or better yet, strengthen us with preventive measures so there would be no war. It wasn't the weapons that I was asking for. I asked for sanctions. Intimidate him. Please don't say that. If he comes, if he crosses borders, if he kills, we're imposing sanctions. Well, this is complete bullshit. Sorry, but really?
Oh, I understand this.
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
I understood one word.
The word he understood was likely bullshit there, but what Zelensky's saying is the United States began to put sanctions post the invasion. After the invasion happened is when the United States started to try to impose weak sanctions. And at that point, it's too little too late. So what Zelensky's saying there is the sanctions should have been preventative measures, not something that we do after the fact and impose weak sanctions after Russia's entire strategy is to build a wartime economy. That's the thing. If we would have done sanctions before, it could have prevented a lot of this, but the fact that we allowed Russia to invade and build a wartime economy off the back of this invasion hurts global security, hurts Ukraine, hurts a lot. I have one more clip that I'd love to play for you guys where Zelensky is basically talking about the Budapest Memorandum and how all of these countries agreed in the 90s that if Ukraine gave up their nukes, we would come to their defense if Russia invaded them, and Russia agreed not to invade them. While the US did help Ukraine a lot, while European countries have helped Ukraine a lot, I think he's right. It's not enough. The fact that this war has gone on this long shows that Putin is playing the long game. You know, something I always say in my videos is that even if you end the war now, you need to do it in a way where it does not appease Putin in any way. We can take this from 1939, but number one, you can't appease dictators. We can also look at the history of Russia, number two, and what they do is they'll start a war, then they'll pause that war when it's convenient for them, when it serves their interest, then they reignite that war 5 to 10 years down the road. So in 2008, they invaded Georgia, they chilled out, they rearmed, then in 2014, they invaded Crimea, they chilled out, they rearmed, then in 2022, they launched a full-scale invasion into Ukraine, and you can see where this would go. If Trump tries to end the war, all Putin is going to do is wait 8 years until they're rearmed, they're stronger, their economies bounce back, and then boom, they reinvade where they left off. That's how it works, and that's why I think Zelensky's right when he says, he's implying the fact that the war has gone on this long is a failure of the West to step up like we were supposed to.
Україна проводить консультації, якщо порушена її територіальну цілісність. І всі повинні бути на консультації. Всі повинні приїхати. Всі повинні зустрітися терміново. Америка, Британія, Росія, Франція, Китай. Чи хтось приїхав, ви запитаєте? Ні. Чи хтось відповів на ці листи, офіційні листи? Вони всі є зафіксовані у дипломатах. Чи хтось консультації провів? Ні. Чому? Да похеру. Це ж зрозуміло російською, правильно? От як російською було похеру, так і всім іншим гарантерам безпеки Будапештського мира. Всім було похеру на цю страну, на цих людей, на ці гарантії безпеки тощо.
He's largely right. I mean, we do give a damn, of course, but sometimes it seems like we've let it get this far. And Zelensky's passionate because he's been living this on the ground for the past 2 years. And just from a broad perspective, something I always say is, Russia knows that they wouldn't be able to beat the US in a ground war. They know that it would be too expensive to launch a ground invasion towards any other country than their next door neighbor, so they fight with informational warfare. And the worst part is a lot of our politicians play into it so perfectly. I've already named a few: Vivek Ramaswamy, Tucker Carlson's not a politician, but people like, I don't know, Ted Cruz or other people like that will both sides this till the end of the day. They'll act like it's a conflict of equals when it's not. It's not a situation where both sides share blame. It's not a situation where both sides are the aggressors. There is one aggressor here, and there's one person defending its land, or there's one country defending its land, defending its people, defending its future as a sovereign nation, and Russia is the one that's waging this war and this disinformation campaign that's been dangerously effective. We all need to realize this. The Russian disinformation campaign worked so well that the Orange Man got into office. The Russian disinformation campaign worked so well that most American citizens are convinced that Zelensky is stealing from American taxpayers, when that's not even true. And going back to what I said in another video earlier today, part of it's a failure of the Democratic Party's messaging. After an election, it's a great time to think about where you went wrong, and the Democratic Party's messaging apparatus can be weak. That's the least we can all admit. I'm sure everybody watching this, most people watching this, you guys are either in the center, probably some Republicans. The vast majority of people that are watching this are Democrats. And just know that when I'm criticizing the Democratic Party, it's because I want it to be better, and its messaging needs to be better. Around Ukraine, around other items, the messaging around this needs to be better, because when American citizens are telling their representative in their district that they don't want to vote for Ukraine funding, that is how the Ukraine funding gets squashed, obviously, when Congress votes against it. And how do you change the minds of American citizens in these districts? Well, you infiltrate their TikTok feed or their Twitter feed. And by the way, Twitter is a perfect breeding ground for Russian disinformation. Elon Musk just lets it run rampant, because why wouldn't he? So we have a lot to do to fight back on this Russian disinformation. At the same time, we're fighting back against MAGA disinformation, and they really do go hand in hand, these two ecosystems of disinformation. So as MAGA politicians over the next 4 years try to undermine Ukraine's fight for sovereignty, we need to make sure we're pushing back so we're not weakening global unity. Zelensky's message is clear here. There can be no compromise with a dictator who has no respect for international law or human life. Appeasing Putin is like appeasing Hitler in 1939. It will not work out. It will not bring peace. It's naive to think so. It only invites more and more aggression. And if we allow disinformation to blur the lines, we risk not only Ukraine's future, but the very principles that underpin global safety. And I'll leave it at that. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Drop a like, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Love you.